The cicadas began their screaming just after dawn, long before Claire was ready to wake. She dragged the sheet over her head, but the sound pressed through the cotton like heat itself. Summer on Ash Grove Lane always arrived like a lid on a pot. Close, humming, airless. This year felt heavier. Even the light coming through her blinds seemed thick, more amber than gold, as if the neighborhood had been lacquered overnight. From her bedroom window, Claire saw the cul-de-sac rubbing sleep from its eyes. Sprinklers ticked in slow arcs across clipped lawns, throwing off prisms that broke on the hot pavement. Mr. Green, shirtless and determined, attacked his hedges with a humming trimmer. 3 little kids pedaled their bikes in lazy circles, their laughter floating up in pieces, oddly hollow, as if the air swallowed the middles of their words. At the very end of the street stood the Harrow house. It had been boarded for as long as Claire remembered, tall and narrow, its siding gray as unbaked clay, the porch steps sagging like a yawn. Morning after morning, the house was there, and morning after morning, her eyes slid off it. But today they stuck. One of the attic boards was missing. She pushed her blinds wider. Maybe it had rotted. Maybe a storm had popped it loose. But there hadn't been a storm, not in weeks. The hole where the board had been was a mouth of glass. And the glass behind it wasn't the clean black of shadow. It was denser, like tar pooled in a window shape. For a heartbeat, the tar shifted. A pale suggestion, cheekbone, knuckles, leaned into the dark and was gone. Claire! The door banged open. Emily vaulted onto her bed, all elbows and knees and morning breath, brandishing a rained-on paperback like a trophy. It's summer. We are free. Mason says the creek. Door, Claire said, but she was smiling. She checked her phone. 2 missed texts from Mason, both urgent with no content. Creek. Now. Bring him. She looked back at the attic window. The gap was still a gap. Nothing moved behind it. By the time they stepped outside, the sun had burned any kindness out of the morning. Heat rose in transparent shivers off the asphalt. The street smelled like tar and cut grass, coppery and sweet. Emily sprinted ahead in jelly sandals, waving at Mason where he straddled his bike at the curb like a knight who'd misplaced the rest of his costume. Race you to the creek, he called, already pushing off. Emily shot after him, shrieking. Claire followed at a human pace, her notebook under her arm, her skin prickling. She glanced once more at the Harrow house. The missing board made a square missing tooth high in the face. Through it, the attic window glinted as if it had swallowed a little sun and kept it. The creek ran under the road half a mile from the cul-de-sac, the water itself thin with the long dry spell, a ribbon in a cracked bed. The kids liked the drainage tunnel more than the creek. Its high concrete mouth swaddled in ivy and graffiti, cool air spilling out like a conditioned sigh. It was a place where you could be near the heat without being in it, where your voice came back thinner and stranger, as if it had walked farther than you had. Beat you, Emily said, breathless, touching the tunnel wall. Her hand came away with chalk dust the color of sky. Someone had drawn a hopscotch grid there, numbers stacked wrong. 5, 6, 6, 7, 5. Featureless stick figures ringed the grid, their arms long and jointless. Creepy, Claire said. She put a finger on 6 and smudged it to nothing. A small, mean part of her felt better immediately. Mason dumped his bike. He was taller this summer, his edges sharper, hair longer. He had one of those faces that looked more honest when he was about to lie. There's a snapping turtle, he said, pointing downstream. Big as your head. Emily made a noise halfway between delight and terror. I want to see it. Claire followed them to the shallows. Minnows scattered like iron filings. A crawfish backed under a rock with a rude little wave of claws. No turtle. Only a half-rotted log and a soda can catching light. Wow, Claire said. A turtle that looks exactly like trash. You never believe, Mason said, grinning. He flicked water at her. Then, as if nothing important had changed in their entire lives, he started talking about his summer job at the pool snack bar, about using the soft serve machine wrong on purpose to make kid towers, about how Mr. Green had complained to his mom about juvenile loitering, and she'd said, Mason doesn't loiter, he percolates. The sound of him rolled on, Bubbles in hot water. Claire tuned in and out, letting the voices and the creak and the cicadas layer. She tested a flat stone, and it flew far and straight, skipping 6 times before sinking in a ring of ripples that slid to her ankles. She wrote 3 words in her notebook. It felt heavier. Then drew a little square at the top of a triangle, a missing tooth high in a house's face, and quickly closed the notebook as if she'd revealed too much to the day. She wasn't superstitious. She was careful. She had learned the difference last year when being careless had ended with a girl sobbing in a locker room and Claire's own phone turned off for a week. "Your mom gonna be home for lunch?" Mason asked. "Late shift," Claire said. "She said to text if we explode." "I won't explode," Emily said. "Only combust and only when provoked." "It's always the youngest," Mason said gravely. They wandered until the heat drove them back up the hill. On the way, they passed the community pool. A spray of water glittered over the fence, kids' heads pistoned up and down. The ice cream truck rang its song from the parking lot. A simple chimed melody, a tinny lullaby that made even Claire feel, for a second, like summer had forgiven them for everything. The truck's paint was new, a crisp white with blue waves and a smiling cartoon whale. But the driver, just a triangle of pale forearm on the wheel, a ring of hair at the back of his head, stayed exactly in place through the whole song, like a cutout glued to a window. Claire waved reflexively. The driver didn't. The truck's speaker hiccuped, and the tune slid a note out of key for a breath before popping back. It was nothing. The heat. A bad splice in the song file. She felt the little prickle anyway, like a grain of sand in her eye you couldn't dig out. They ate popsicles on Mason's driveway, the sticky red running down their wrists. Emily pointed at the end of the street. "It looks closer today," she said, mouth pink. "What does?" Claire asked, though she knew. "The house," Emily said, and then, quickly, as if covering, "Or maybe the sun is closer." "Everything's closer in summer," Mason said. "That's why it's dangerous. No space to think." "Deep," Claire said, but she was looking past him. The Harrow house gazed down the lane with its flat gray face. Even from here, Claire could make out the attic rectangle where the board had been. The black behind it showed no glassy glare, no reflected sky, only a depth that didn't belong in a window at midday. Mrs. Wilcox from across the street walked her labradoodle past the house, and the dog, a creature whose most intense emotion was usually delight, put all 4 feet down like a mule and refused. Mrs. Wilcox tugged and tugged. The dog made a low sound Claire had never heard from it, not a growl, something like a hum, the note you find by accident when you rub a glass with your finger. "You okay?" Mason followed her gaze. "Yeah," Claire said. Just don't," he said, light. "Don't start the summer weird. We can get to weird later." They laughed. It broke the surface. They let it. By noon, the cul-de-sac had boiled to a shine. The little kids vanished into air-conditioned caves. The sprinkler rainbows turned to steam. Claire and Emily went home. The house was dim and blessedly cooler. Their mom had left a note next to a bowl of fruit. Dinner, pizza. Hydrate. Hydrate. Love you, idiots. And $20 under a magnet shaped like a lemon. They sprawled on the living room floor with a fan pointed at their faces, watching a show where teenagers solved crimes with moods. Claire sketched. She wasn't good at faces. Hers always ended up looking like masks. Houses she could do. She drew the Harrow house 3 times from memory, then once from feeling. The feeling one had windows that were a little too big and a door that might be a mouth if you tilted the paper. In the attic, she pressed the pencil so hard it dented the page. "Stop drawing the creepy," Emily said, without looking away from the TV. "Stop knowing what I'm drawing," Claire said. Emily rolled onto her stomach and made her voice deep. "Do not bring attention to it. It likes attention." "That's not how anything works," Claire said, and scruffed Emily's hair, and Emily kicked her in the hip without malice. In the late afternoon, when the light went honey low and shadows grew distinct and crisp like objects themselves, Claire walked the lane alone. She told Emily she was going to return a library book. She did put the book in her backpack, but she took the long way. She wanted to see the house in this light. She wanted to prove to herself that daylight could polish anything back to normal. Mr. Harrow, no relation to the house, though most kids assumed otherwise, was trimming the verge with a hand clipper, a ridiculous slow tool he insisted on using. He was in his 60s, his skin tanned like an old shoe, his silver hair buzzed short. He had been the groundskeeper at the school until the accident with the tractor, and he wore shorts without apology over his scarred knee. He lifted 2 fingers to Claire as she passed. "Hydrate," he said. "Yes, sir," Claire said automatically. He clipped, clipped. "Sundown," he said after a moment, eyes still on the grass. "Don't take your sister past the end of the lane at sundown. Or yourself, but you're harder to stop." Claire tried to make it a joke. "Is that on account of my massive inertia?" "On account of sundown," he said. He looked up then, not at her, but over her shoulder. Claire turned to follow his gaze. The Harrow house sat in the wide-angle empty at the end of the cul-de-sac, the street funneling toward it like a tongue finding a sore tooth. "Did that board always?" she started. "No," Mr. Harrow said. They watched the attic for a breath beyond comfortable. "Gonna be kids," he said. "Always kids first. Doesn't mean it chooses them. Just means they get there quicker." He glanced at her then, and the look was tired more than frightened. People think a house sits still. Houses move. They decide. Do what you're going to do, Claire, but don't pretend you weren't told. She didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't planning to do anything. She wasn't the one who did things. "Okay," she said. "Hydrate," he said again, as if that might turn into a charm if spoken enough. She took the curve of the cul-de-sac wide, so she wouldn't end up pointed directly at the house even for a moment. The mailboxes all stood at attention like gray birds. At the last box, the one no one used anymore, the Owenses, a stray flyer had wedged itself behind the raised red flag. Claire slid it out. The paper was blank, not even lines, but puffed and soft, like it had been damp and then dried. When she held it up, there were faint ripples in it, as if someone had pressed wet fingers along the bottom edge and left an invisible shoreline. She tucked it back. She knew a superstition when it asked for favor. At dinner, their mom came home with hair stuck to her neck and 2 pizzas sweating in their boxes. "I saw the Wilcox dog refuse the end of the street," she said, conversationally, like the weather. "Dog says no, I say no. We'll go the other way to the fireworks this year." "It's 6 weeks to fireworks," Claire said, and her mom kissed the top of her head anyway. "Planning is half the joy," her mom said. "Is Mason still eating here every 3rd meal of the day?" "Only when he percolates," Claire said. After dinner, Claire and Emily lay on the porch steps with popsicles they hadn't earned, watching fireflies nail bright dots into the dark. The ice cream truck went by again. Song steady now. Driver still a cutout. A group of older boys clattered down the sidewalk doing tricks with a skateboard and a can of tennis balls. A woman pushed a stroller whose occupant had fallen into that boneless baby sleep where they looked like a puppet with the strings cut. Normal. The kind of normal that, if you took a step back, began to look posed. Claire's phone buzzed. "Mason. Night field trip? I have a flashlight and no adult supervision. What could go wrong?" Then, "Kidding. Mostly. Just the creek. It's cooler." Claire typed and erased, typed and erased. Another night she finally sent and added a skull to make it unserious. She deleted the skull before sending. She wasn't sure what it implied. Sometime after 10, Emily fell asleep on the couch with a fan blowing her hair into damp robes. Their mom yawned and declared she was made of cement. Lights went out in windows up and down the lane, one after another like a thoughtful pattern. Claire brushed her teeth and stood at her bedroom window with the light off, feeling the heat lift away, thinking about nothing and then about everything in one fast rush that felt like falling. Down the street, the neighbor's motion light clicked on. The beam washed over their walkway, a rectangle of cool white. Usually a cat set it off. Tonight, nothing moved. Or something did, but not in the beam. A shadow sliding against the far fence, tan on tan, barely discernible. Traveling like a line of ants too far to make out. The motion light clicked off. The darkness that fell wasn't the same as the darkness from a minute before. It came down heavier, like a duvet. Claire looked at the Harrow house. The attic gap was a black postage stamp on the sky. She made her eyes blur and then sharpen, a trick she used to break out of staring at nothing. The stamp stayed a stamp. Then, in a window 2 floors lower, where the plywood had been for years, something glimmered. Not light. A quality, a shine of wet. She counted to 10, the way you do with lightning. It stayed. She blinked hard and the glimmer was gone, or had never been. Her mouth tasted like pennies. She closed the blinds and lay down with her notebook on her chest like a seatbelt you could choose not to click. She flipped it open in the dark and wrote one sentence without looking. The house was closer today. Her hand pressed too hard. The sentence carved the page, visible in the sheets beneath. She dreamed an ordinary dream. She was late for a test in a class she had never taken, and when she turned her paper over, every question was the same one written in different fonts. What is the difference between a house and a body? She woke a little before midnight with her heart beating like she'd run. The cicadas had wound down, as if someone had turned a dial and lowered their noise to make room for another sound, some smaller household hum. On the quiet, the ice cream truck's song came again. Not outside, from somewhere inside itself, inside the melody, a note that wasn't a note, a breath catching on a hymn. The truck wasn't on the street. She knew that, in the way you know you're alone in a room without opening your eyes. The song kept playing somewhere, though, and whatever played it didn't need speakers. Claire sat up and turned on her lamp. The room was normal in the light. Her chest hurt as if a belt had been tightened on it. One hole farther than comfortable. She told herself to hydrate. She got up for water and stood at the sink for a long time, drinking a glass and then another, until the belt feeling loosened and air could get in again. On her way back to bed, she noticed a smear on her bedroom window, a long crescent like someone had pressed the heel of a damp hand there. She rubbed it with the hem of her t-shirt. It didn't move. She breathed on it, and it vanished, the glass clearing where her breath touched it, as if the breath were colder than the pain. She lay down and opened her notebook again. The sentence she'd written before, "The house was closer today," had bled a little through the paper, darker at the downstrokes. She touched the ink. Dry. Her fingers came away faintly gray anyway, like she'd handled graphite. She closed the notebook and held it to her chest. Somewhere down the lane, a sprinkler coughed and died. Silence rose behind it, and then, as if it had been waiting for quiet, a single short knock sounded from a direction Claire couldn't name. A second knock, soft and hollow. A third, lower, like knuckles on a door that didn't exist. She counted 3 more in her head that didn't happen, and somehow hearing the ones she expected not to hear felt worse than hearing too many. She got up again and went to the window, pushing 2 slats of the blind apart with her fingers. The cul-de-sac held its breath. In the distance, a tree scraped itself against the sky. The Harrow house stood like a shadow someone had cut out of a darker fabric and pasted at the end of the world. In the attic gap, no movement. On the porch, no figures. On the lawn, the weeds lay flat as if pressed by a recent hand. The sash of a lower window, the one with the knot light earlier, had been raised an inch. She was certain of it without being able to say how. Her phone buzzed. "Mason, you up?" Then, "I know you said another night." But the creak is louder at night. The tunnel breathes. Then, before she could answer, "Forget it. Go to sleep, nerd." She typed, "Good night, percolator," and sent it. She took a picture through the slats of the Harrow house and deleted it immediately. The act of saving it felt like inviting it home. When she finally slept, it was because sleep fell on her like a curtain, not because she went to meet it. In the last thin inch of waking, she thought she heard the ice cream truck again. Only one note, but bent until it sounded like something trying to remember music. She put her hand on her notebook without meaning to, and the paper was warm under her palm, as if it had been sitting in sunlight, as if it had its own small fever. Just before morning, a breeze licked the blinds and lifted the corner of a page. The page rose and settled. In the gray light before the cicadas tuned their strings, The attic board that had been missing. Up the street, across the cul-de-sac, in a house no one entered. Slipped a fraction lower in its nail holes, wood sighing against old wood. And somewhere, not outside and not inside, something marked the change and smiled. By noon, the heat had turned mean. The sky was a sheet of white glass, and even the shade looked tired of itself. Claire, Emily, and Mason cut through the thin stand of trees behind the pool and followed the brittle ribbon of water until the creek's culvert opened its cool mouth. It was always colder at the mouth. The air spilling from it smelled like wet coins and forgotten jobs. "Last chance to back out," Mason said, grinning the grin he wore when he wanted to look braver than he felt. Claire stared into the dark. "We go halfway," she said, "and only if it's shallow." Emily bounced on her toes, giddy and nervous. "Halfway and shallow," she agreed, as if reciting a charm. Inside, the tunnel swallowed their footsteps, turned them into other people walking close behind. Water whispered over their ankles. Graffiti climbed the concrete, names and crude faces, and, Claire noticed with a tightness in her chest, a repeated symbol someone had drawn again and again, as if practicing. A house shape with a single window too large for the wall that held it. Mason swept his flashlight in a slow arc. The beam quickened the shadows, made them pretend to be alive. "Hear that?" he said. "Water," Claire said. "And your heartbeat." "No, listen." At first she heard nothing else. Then the water's hush cracked, a small hiss, the sound of breath refusing to be the same as air. Something moved ahead, a shiver in black, the water breaking around a shape crouched in the center of the flow. Emily's fingers latched onto Claire's wrist. "It's looking at us." "We're leaving," Claire said. Mason took one step forward, and the beam found it. For a slice of a second, the shape was a diagram. Joints where joints should not be, elbows that bent again, skin the color of paper soaked and dried and soaked again. A face flicked up and away, no eyes, or too many, Claire couldn't tell. And then the thing scrambled deeper. The hiss, thinning into a sound you could only hear if you were the kind of person who listened too hard. They ran. The tunnel spat them into sunlight and sound, cicadas sawing, grasshoppers popping like hot grease, a dog barking at something at nothing. Emily doubled over, breath hitching. Mason was pale under his summer tan. "Raccoon," he said a second too late, like a defense he'd failed to study for. "No," Claire said, and they heard in it what she meant. Not a raccoon, not a joke, not something they would name without it hearing them. They stood in the heat until the real world remembered them, until the neighborhood laid its heavy hands back on their shoulders. Sprinklers, lawnmowers, a baby wailing 2 streets over, the ice cream truck chiming a cheerful song from somewhere out of sight. Everything slotted back into its bright routines the way a bead finds the hole when you stop shaking. "Let's go home," Emily said, small now. Claire nodded. On the path up to the pool fence, Emily stopped so quickly that Claire bumped her. The little girl stared down at the dust by her sandal and said, very quietly, "I didn't drop that." It lay half-buried where the hard-packed path met the weeds. A plastic charm, the kind you'd win with tickets at the arcade. A tiny house threaded on a tarnished ball chain. Claire kicked dirt off it with her toe. The house had a single window engraved on its front, a square too big for the wall that held it. Mason crouched. "Cool," he said weakly. "Treasure." Emily didn't touch it. "It doesn't belong to us." Claire slipped the chain into her pocket anyway. "We'll bring it to Lost and Found at the pool," she said. But as she said it, she pictured it there, in a plastic bin with swim goggles and loose Legos, and the image felt wrong, like putting a tooth in the junk drawer. Halfway up the hill, the ice cream truck's tune bent wrong again, one note slipping low before it was yanked back, like someone had stepped on a child's recorder. Claire's skin pebbled in the heat. They reached the sidewalk as the truck rolled into view at the corner, glossy paint winking, the grinning whale wider than it had any right to be. The driver didn't look at them. He didn't look at anything. He sat with his hands at 10 and 2, gray hair tight against his neck, as if waiting for a signal none of them could see. Emily whispered, "He never blinks." "Shut up," Mason said reflexively, too quickly. Like he'd had the thought first and was angry at it for arriving. The truck's song hiccuped again as it passed the top of Ash Grove Lane. It did not turn in. Back at the house, Claire dumped ice into 3 glasses and poured whatever was coldest over it, listening to the Kraken's sigh as the cubes surrendered. She slid a glass to Emily and one to Mason and left hers sweating on the counter while she went to the sink and took the charm from her pocket. Up close, the cheap plastic smelled faintly of pennies and pond. The little house had no door, only the too big window. On the back, someone had scratched 3 letters, H-A-R. Har, Claire started. Row, Mason finished. Because a punchline is nothing but a map to the fastest place to stand. Stop, Emily said. Claire scrubbed the charm under the tap. For a second, the water beaded on it as if it were greasy. Then the beads slid off in a sheet, and the charm was just a charm again. Pool lost and found, Claire said, and dropped it in the blue bowl where their keys and receipts ended up to die. They spent the afternoon pretending to be ordinary. They played Go Fish and let Emily cheat. Mason tried to do a handstand and failed, twice, in a way that made Emily laugh for real. Claire texted her mom a picture of all 3 of them grinning hard enough to show molars. The sun slid toward evening and shadows went long and thin and somehow more solid than the objects that cast them. At 5, Mason's mom texted, summoning him for dinner and reminding him he had a shift at the snack bar the next day. He left with 2 quick salutes and a promise to be less dumb tomorrow. The minute the door clicked behind him, the house changed shape. The air stretched. The rooms moved a hair to the left. Claire shook the feeling off like a fly. Emily padded down the hall, then stopped. Claire? What? The bowl, Emily said. The blue bowl on the table was empty. Receipts, a bent paper clip, a missing earring back still clung to its sides. The plastic house charm was gone. I probably tossed it in my bag, Claire said, too fast, too professional. She upended her backpack onto the table. Books, pencil case, a crumpled flyer from the pool. No charm. She rifled the counter. She checked the sink and the drain trap. She checked the floor under the table. The shoes by the door, the pocket she'd definitely taken it out of. No charm. Maybe it fell out when you reached into your pocket, Emily said, relief blooming like a bruise. On the sidewalk. It could be anywhere. Claire wanted to agree. She wanted to feel the easy lift of an explanation. Yeah, she said. Anywhere. She put the blue bowl back on the table and walked away fast enough to convince herself she had not just seen, in the ring of dust where the charm should have been, a faint wet mark in the rough shape of a square window too large for the wall that held it. That evening, the sky turned the color of the inside of a peach. Sprinklers clicked on again like a chorus entering on cue. Their mom came home late with a grocery bag that held milk, grapes, and a box of popsicles that promised flavors not found in nature. She looked washed out around the edges. You two okay? She asked. And when Claire said yes, she believed her because believing your kids is a job you can do even when you're too tired to do the dishes. After dinner, Claire and Emily sat on the front steps and listened to the neighborhood counting itself. Garage doors, laughter, someone playing guitar badly 2 streets over. The Harrow house at the end of the lane wore its shadow like a shawl. In the attic rectangle where the board was missing, the dark held its breath. Do you think we'll ever go inside? Emily asked, casual, as if asking about the pool after hours. No, Claire said. We're not tourists. Tourists? In other people's tragedies, Claire said, and didn't know where the sentence had come from until she realized she'd stolen it from a true crime podcast and then cut it down to fit her mouth. The ice cream truck came again as the streetlights woke. It rolled slowly past the top of the lane, playing its song. It did not turn in. It did not need to. The song reached them anyway, thinner now. A thread pulled through all their houses, passing through and leaving something behind. Not sweetness, not memory, but a shadow of wanting. When Claire finally went to her room, she paused at the door. The window was open an inch. She hadn't opened it. She crossed and shut it. Her fingers came away damp, as if the glass had been sweating. She dried her hands on her shorts and felt something small and hard in the pocket she'd emptied earlier. She pulled it out. The charm lay in her palm. The cheap plastic house, the too big window, the scratched letters H-A-R like a word interrupted. It was warm, the way a penny is warm when you find it under your thigh on the couch, as if it had been kept in a body. Claire didn't scream. She didn't even drop it. She stood very still and let her heart do all the moving for her. Then she walked to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and set the charm on the porcelain lip of the sink. She watched water run over it until her skin puckered at the wrists. The charm stayed where it was, blank-eyed and patient. She wrapped it in toilet paper and laid it gently in the trash. "Stay," she said, and the absurdity of telling trash to stay almost made her laugh. The laugh didn't arrive. She returned to her room and closed the door with the deliberate care of someone who has never once believed in monsters and is not going to start now. She lay down and opened her notebook and wrote, "The tunnel breathed." Then, "The truck doesn't need to enter the street to enter the street." Then she underlined enter and didn't like how many times she had to cross the letter T, like a fence she could be made to climb. Sleep came in freckles, not in a wash. She turned over and over, flipping herself like a burger, trying to find the side that didn't burn. Sometime after midnight, she woke to a small sound from the bathroom across the hall. Not the fridge hum, not pipes talking, not the house shifting its old bones. A tiny clink, like a ring tapping porcelain. Then another. Then, in a voice too soft to be a voice, a sound like a fingernail tracing a square on tile. Claire sat up. The world held still for her, like a class waiting for a question. She stood and padded to the hall. The bathroom door was ajar. The light was off. The street light poured a weak square onto the tile through the window. She pushed the door with her fingertips. The sink was dry. The trash can lay on its side, paper flowers scattered. At the center of the mess, the charm lay face up. The little house, the big window, the scratched H-A-R. As Claire watched, a drop of water fell from nowhere and struck the charm, magnifying the window for a second until it was a perfect clear eye. She didn't pick it up. "No," she said to an empty room. The word felt like stepping back from a curb as the bus you didn't see passes so close it brushes your shirt. "No." She went to the kitchen, found the heavy glass jar their mom used for loose change and ill-considered pickles, and dropped the charm inside. The thunk it made against the bottom was solid, satisfying, real. She screwed the lid down hard enough to squeal the metal. She set the jar in the freezer behind a wall of peas. When she closed the freezer, the hum of the motor wrapped the jar's small silence like a blanket. On her way back to bed, Claire paused at the window. The cul-de-sac floated in its dish of dark. A motion light 3 doors down bloomed and went out. A moth pinged itself to death against a bulb. At the end of the lane, the Harrow house had not moved, but the shadow around it seemed to pulse, the way heat does over the road. In the attic square, where the board had gone, where the sky should be, a faint reflection trembled, as if water had been lifted there in a pane. Claire leaned closer without meaning to. In the water, or the glass pretending to be water, something drifted forward. Not a face, not a hand, but the idea of both, coming together slow as clotting. Claire stepped back. She closed the blind. She lay down and told herself a story that had never failed her as a child. All doors are doors. All windows are windows. All houses are houses. She repeated it until it had no meaning left, until it was just a pattern you could lay over anything to make it seem like itself. In the morning, the freezer hummed. When Claire opened it for ice, frost had skinned the pickle jar in white. She rubbed the glass with her palm until a hole cleared, small as a coin. Through it, the charm looked far away, as if the jar were a telescope aimed at the bottom of a cold ocean. She felt better than she had any right to feel. Emily wandered in, hair a storm cloud. "Why is there a house in the freezer?" "It's a science experiment," Claire said. Emily nodded as if this were an answer that required no follow-up. "What happens now?" "It gets colder," Claire said. "Then it stays." Emily squinted at her. "Things don't stay." She popped a grape in her mouth and left, already humming some song that wasn't the ice cream truck, but could have been if the notes were worse. The day burned forward. Mason texted a picture of his snack bar name tag and 3 variations of the word bored. Claire walked to the library and back, pretending the heat was a body she could pass through without it slipping under her clothes. On the return, she stopped at the top of Ashgrove Lane and looked down. It was the same in every way that counts. The mailboxes, the smooth curl of asphalt, the way every front yard was a small, polite stage. But the cul-de-sac didn't look like a circle today. It looked like a bowl, and the Harrow house was the drain. Claire stood very still while a breeze she couldn't feel slid past her. She thought about the tunnel, the hiss, the thing that had turned away from the light like a person irritated by rudeness. She thought about the charm in the freezer, about Frost pretending to be safety. She thought about the truck's song bending wrong and being bent back. Halfway and shallow, she said out loud, as if cousins of those words could be made to work elsewhere. The phrase sounded flimsy in the white air. A movement at the end of the street. Not a person, not a dog. The weeds in the Harrow house yard laid themselves down, as if stroked by a wind that had chosen a single patch of earth to love. In the attic gap, something like a curtain shifted, though there was no curtain and no breeze. Claire could feel it, like the faint pressure on your eardrums in an elevator when the floor decides to remember gravity. Her phone buzzed. Mason again. Tonight, Creek? I swear we bring better light and it turns out to be kids messing around. Claire typed, another night. Then, before she could send it, the freezer motor clicked off in the kitchen behind her and the house went very quiet. The quiet sharpened a sound from the end of the lane. 3 soft knocks, evenly spaced, like someone on a far door asking to be let in by whoever had heard them in a dream. Claire deleted the words she'd typed. She wrote, okay, early, home by 10. She hit send and did not look up at the attic where the knot curtain had settled. She did not look at the weeds, which had risen as if nothing had pressed them at all. She walked home with her shoulders square and her fists soft, practicing being someone who chose the dare instead of having it laid at her feet. In the kitchen, she opened the freezer again and checked the jar. Frost had fogged it over a second time. She cleared another circle with her palm. Through it, the charm sat where she'd left it, the tiny window blank and harmless. It stayed because she told herself it stayed. It stayed because morning was good at lying for you when you needed it to. It stayed until the freezer motor coughed and caught and the ice maker clicked somewhere deep, and when Claire glanced back, the second circle she'd cleared had blurred with her breath. Under the blur, for an instant that could have been a trick of condensation, the charm's window wasn't blank at all. It held a square of gray sky. Then a darker square slid across it, like a board moving from the inside. Claire closed the freezer. She put her forehead against the cool door and smiled at her reflection, a pale ripple in the stainless steel. Her reflection smiled back, exactly as it should, exactly as she needed it to, until the corners of its mouth held on a heartbeat longer than hers. She flattened her hands against the door and said, to the kitchen, to the cul-de-sac, to the house that waited at the end of it, halfway and shallow. Then, softer, letting the lie become a promise because promises were easier to carry. Home by 10. Outside, the ice cream truck's song found its wrong note and kept it for the length of a breath before letting go. And down at the creek, in the tunnel where names and eyes watched from the concrete, water whispered the shape of a word around stones it had known for years. It wasn't a word Claire recognized. It sounded like a house exhaling through an open window.
The third night of summer broke the rhythm. Until then, Ashgrove Lane had been loud with sprinklers and dogs and kids scuffing chalk across driveways. That evening, though, the neighborhood settled into a strange hush, as if everyone had shut their blinds against the same thought. By 9 o'clock, only the cicadas dared make sound, and even they rasped in shorter bursts, as if catching their breath between warnings. Claire felt it before she heard it, a kind of pressure under her ribs. The sense that something had shifted in the layout of the world. Emily lay curled beside her on the couch, fast asleep with a popsicle stick still clutched in her hand. Their mom hadn't come home yet. Mason texted twice about sneaking out again, but Claire hadn't answered. She was listening too hard. From the end of the lane came a sound like an old house turning over in its sleep. Wood stretching, nails complaining. It carried on the still air, a deep creak that didn't belong outside. Claire tiptoed to the window, careful not to wake Emily, and lifted one slat of the blinds. The Harrow house loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac, darker than the night around it. One of the plywood boards over the lower windows had shifted. Not fallen, shifted. It hung at an angle, nails half out, as if pushed from within. Behind it, a gray light pulsed faintly, too dim to be electricity, too steady to be moonlight. Claire's stomach turned cold. Houses didn't breathe, but the Harrow house was. She could see the boards move with each invisible exhale. Her phone buzzed against her palm. A new message from Mason. "I'm outside. Look." She pulled the blinds a fraction wider. Sure enough, Mason stood at the corner under the street lamp, hands jammed into his hoodie, chin lifted like a dare. When he saw her, he waved urgently toward the end of the lane. "No," she whispered to herself. But Mason was already walking, slow, deliberate steps toward the Harrow house. She shook Emily awake. "Get up." Emily blinked, bleary. "What?" "Mason's being an idiot. I'm not letting him go down there alone." Emily rubbed her eyes, then nodded, serious now. She left the popsicle stick on the couch and grabbed her sneakers. They slipped outside together, the heat still sticking to their skin, even in the dark. Street lamps buzzed faintly, moths jittering against the glass. The cul-de-sac felt longer than usual, the curve stretching as if the house at the end was pulling it tight like a string. Mason turned when he heard them. "You came." "You're an idiot," Claire said. He grinned. "Probably, but it's awake tonight. You feel it, right?" Emily shivered. "It's watching." They stopped halfway down the lane. The air smelled of wet plaster, though no one was doing work this late. The weeds in the Harrow yard were laid flat again, pressed in a pattern too even to be wind. "Listen," Mason whispered. They did. For a long moment, only cicadas. Then, creak, nails popping like knuckles. The sound of a house inhaling. Claire's scalp prickled. "We're leaving, now." But before Mason could argue, Emily's voice cut through. "It's calling." They spun to look at her. Emily's eyes were unfocused, her lips parted, as if she were repeating words fed directly into her head. She took 3 steps forward before Claire caught her arm. "Em, no!" Emily struggled, then blinked as if waking from a dream. "I didn't mean..." The house groaned again, louder this time. One of the attic boards shifted, the gap widening. For a heartbeat, Claire swore she saw the attic not as a room, but as a throat. Black, slick, waiting. Mason swore under his breath. "It wants us inside." "Well, it's not getting us," Claire snapped. She grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her back up the lane. Mason followed, finally serious, his grin gone. They didn't stop until they were inside Claire's house, the door locked, every light on. But light didn't help. The Harrow house had moved with them somehow. When Claire glanced toward the mirror in the hallway, she saw not her own reflection, but the faint outline of the boarded-up windows. For just an instant, the hallway was longer, narrower, paneled in gray. She blinked, and it was only wallpaper. Emily refused to go back to sleep. She sat on the rug with her knees hugged tight, whispering under her breath. Claire leaned close enough to catch the words. "Halfway and shallow. Halfway and shallow." "Where did you hear that?" Claire asked. Emily shrugged, eyes wide. It's the rules. What rules? The house told me. The freezer motor kicked on in the kitchen. Claire jumped. She thought of the charm locked in its pickle jar, frosted in ice. She didn't go check. Some things were safer unseen. Mason sat with his back against the couch, running his hands over his face. "If it's awake now," he muttered, "what happens when it's hungry?" Claire didn't answer. She didn't want to know. At 2 a.m. she heard it again, the sound of the house breathing. Only this time it wasn't distant. It was in the walls. The wallpaper flexed with the sound, seams bulging like lungs. Floorboards swelled and settled. A draft curled down the hallway, carrying the smell of wet stone and mildew. Claire pressed her hands over her ears, but she still felt it, each inhale pulling at her ribs, each exhale pushing back. She turned to Mason, ready to say, "Do you hear it?" But his eyes told her he did. Emily whimpered. "It's in here." The lights flickered, shadows stuttering across the walls. For half a breath, the living room wasn't theirs anymore. The couch was warped wood, the rug a floor of boards, the lamp's windows nailed shut. They were sitting inside the Harrow house. Then the lights steadied, and it was their living room again. But the echo of the house's breath lingered, heavy in their lungs. Nobody slept after that. When morning finally came, Claire went to the window. The cul-de-sac looked ordinary again. Sprinklers, dogs, neighbors walking in shorts and sandals. But the Harrow house at the end of the lane was different. It wasn't boarded anymore. The nails had split, the boards fallen, and every window yawned wide and dark. The house was awake and breathing. The day after the windows opened, the cul-de-sac behaved like nothing had changed. Mr. Green trimmed his hedges. The ice cream truck looped its tinny song. Sprinklers kept ticking arcs of water that evaporated before they reached the ground. But for Claire, every sound was threaded with another, the slow, unseen inhaling of the Harrow house. It was impossible not to stare at it now. Without its boards, the house looked naked, every window a dark eye. Curtains did not move. There were none. But sometimes, when the cicadas paused, she thought she heard shuffling across the floorboards inside. Like people pacing, like feet deciding whether they belonged to anyone. By evening, Mason couldn't take it anymore. "We're going in," he said flatly, standing in Claire's driveway with his bike tossed aside. "We can't let it do whatever it's doing without knowing." Claire wanted to tell him he was insane. Instead, she found herself nodding. "Emily stays here." But Emily shook her head violently. "If you leave me, it'll come get me first." Her eyes were fierce and wide. She was 12, but she sounded older. So the three of them walked together, past the Wilcox house, past the corner where the ice cream truck always turned away, straight down the lane to the Harrow house. The yard crunched underfoot, weeds dried to straw. The porch groaned as Mason pushed the door. It swung inward with a sigh, like a long-held breath released. Inside, dust swirled in beams of dying sunlight. The air was thick with the smell of rot and plaster. Every step raised echoes that didn't match their own. A half-beat behind, heavier, hollow. Claire's throat tightened. "Do you hear that?" Emily nodded. "They're following." "Who?" Mason asked, his bravado cracking. "The ones it made," Emily whispered. They moved through the parlor. Wallpaper peeled in strips, patterns of roses warped into stains. The fireplace gaped with black soot. And above it, scrawled across the wall in what might have been charcoal or something darker, was a word. Har. Letters dragged down like they'd melted. Mason swallowed hard. It's the same as the charm. They climbed the stairs, every step shuddering like a throat swallowing. On the landing, Claire stopped dead. At the end of the hall stood a figure. It was shaped like a person, tall, thin, but empty. Its skin was parchment stretched over nothing, its eyes hollow caves. When it breathed, the air whistled through seams in its chest. Another figure joined it, shorter, with a child's proportions. Its jaw was unhinged, dangling open like a puppet's. The two of them just stood there, breathing in tandem with the house. Claire's skin crawled. "What are they?" Emily answered, voice barely audible. "The Hollow Ones." The Hollow Ones turned their heads in unison. Their faces didn't change, but Claire felt the weight of being noticed. Her legs wanted to run, but the floor swelled beneath her feet, boards arching like a wave holding her in place. Then the figures moved. Not fast, not slow, steady. Each step groaned with the house's breath. Mason yanked his flashlight from his pocket, shining it full in their faces. The light went through them. They weren't solid. They were outlines, skins filled with the same dark that sat behind every window. The taller one opened its mouth. No sound came out. But Claire felt something brush her ear, like words whispered directly into her skull. "You were always meant to join us." She clamped her hands over her ears. It didn't help. The voice was inside her now, inside her ribs, inside the rhythm of her lungs. Emily screamed, "Stop listening!" The Hollow Ones froze at her words, their mouths closed. The house itself creaked, displeased. Mason grabbed Claire's hand and hauled her toward the stairs. They ran, stumbling over warped floorboards, down into the parlor. The Hollow Ones followed. Their footsteps hollowed drums in the walls. They burst through the front door into the cool night. Claire sucked air into her lungs that felt like her own again. Behind them, the house groaned low, a warning, like a predator cheated of prey. They didn't stop running until they reached Claire's driveway. Emily collapsed onto the grass, sobbing. Mason bent double, hands on his knees, gasping. Claire stared down the lane. The Harrow house stood dark and silent. But in its windows she could still see the faint silhouettes, the Hollow Ones, standing still, waiting. "They're not ghosts," she whispered. "They're shells. It's making people." Mason wiped sweat from his face. Out of what? Claire didn't answer. Because she knew the house didn't keep the dead. It hollowed the living. Emily's voice shook. "It tried to hollow me. Last night, when it was breathing in our walls. It wanted me to match." Claire pulled her close, heart pounding. The house was awake, hungry, and patient. And Ashgrove Lane was its bowl. That night, Claire couldn't close her eyes. Every time she blinked, she saw them, the Hollow Ones, waiting with their open chests and empty eyes. She thought of the words scrawled on the parlor wall. Har. Not finished, waiting to be completed. Her notebook lay open beside her. Without realizing, she had written the missing letters over and over until they filled the page. Row. When she finally looked up from the paper, her reflection in the darkened window smiled back. The fourth night of summer did not arrive gently. By sunset, the air had thickened like soup, and thunderheads crouched on the horizon, though no rain fell. Sprinklers never came on. Dogs didn't bark. Not a single cicada sang. Ashgrove Lane held its breath. Claire knew the moment the house decided. She felt it in the soles of her feet, in the way the asphalt under her sneakers seemed softer than it should. The cul-de-sac had shifted. It wasn't a street anymore. It was a circle, a trap, a bowl tilted toward the Harrow house at its end. Mason showed up without being asked. Emily wouldn't be left behind. The three of them stood in the driveway, staring down the lane where the windows of the house glowed faintly gray, like breath caught behind glass. "It's tonight," Mason said. He wasn't grinning. "If we don't face it, it comes for us." Emily's small hand found Claire's. "It already has," she whispered. They walked together. With every step, the street behind them warped, houses leaning, mailboxes bending, the asphalt softening like wax. The cul-de-sac had become an island, and the Harrow house its lighthouse. Only the light it offered was not to guide, but to claim. The front door opened on its own. Inside, the air pulsed like a heartbeat. The wallpaper flexed. The floorboards rose and fell with the rhythm of breath. The house was alive, and it was waiting. They stepped into the parlor. The word on the wall was complete now. Harrow, written in thick black streaks that dripped as if still wet. The hollow ones stood in rows, more of them than before. Tall, short, child-sized, their eyes empty, their mouths slack. They swayed gently, as if rocked by the tide of the house's breathing. One stepped forward. Its skin rippled. Its face was Claire's. Another shifted. It wore Mason's grin. A third bent its neck, and Emily's wide eyes stared out, glassy and hollow. Claire's stomach clenched. The house wasn't just making shells. It was copying, preparing replacements. The floor lurched, tilting them toward the stairs. The attic door yawned above, black and wide. From it came a low, wet whisper. "Choose." Mason swore. "Choose what?" The whisper thickened, filling their heads, their lungs, one to stay, one to hollow, one to carry us out. Claire's knees buckled. The house wasn't content to keep them anymore. It wanted to walk beyond Ashgrove Lane, wearing their skins. Emily sobbed. "Don't let it take me." Mason grabbed Claire's arm. "We fight. We break it." "But how did you break a house?" Claire's eyes fell on her notebook. She'd brought it without realizing, pages already filled with words she hadn't meant to write. Rules, lies, promises. What if the house could be tricked with its own game? She tore out a page and scrawled one line, pressing so hard the pencil snapped. "None will stay. None will hollow. None will carry you." She held it high. The hollow ones froze. The house groaned, beams shuddering. The attic hissed, furious. "A bargain." "You cannot refuse," Claire shouted over the roar. "Then here's mine. You breathe us, but you don't own us. We walk out, and you keep your hunger." The floor heaved. The hollow ones shrieked without voices. But the words on her page burned, letters glowing, and for a heartbeat the house choked on its own breath. "Run!" Claire screamed. They bolted for the door. The walls buckled, wallpaper splitting to reveal ribs of black wood. Hollow ones lunged, their limbs too long, too many, but the kids shoved through, pages fluttering from Claire's notebook like shields. Each line she'd written became a barrier, dissolving a shell before it could touch them. They stumbled onto the porch as the house howled, its windows shattering in unison. The cul-de-sac writhed, asphalt rippling like water, mailboxes collapsing into the street. But they didn't stop running. They fled up the lane, through the warped air, past neighbors' houses that flickered between real and rotten. The street behind them folded inward, collapsing toward the Harrow house like a throat swallowing. At the corner, the ice cream truck waited. Its music played slow, wrong, stretched like a voice underwater. The driver finally moved, lifting his head to reveal a face too smooth, too blank, like a hollow one's mask. He lifted a hand and pointed back toward the collapsing cul-de-sac. Claire tightened her grip on Emily and Mason. "Don't listen. Don't look." They ran past. When they burst onto the main road, the night was ordinary again. Streetlights buzzed, cars passed. The air was heavy, but breathable. Behind them, Ashgrove Lane was gone. Where it had been was only a patch of weeds and a chain-link fence no one remembered building. Emily clung to Claire's arm. "Where's our house?" Claire's chest ached. "It was never ours," Mason panted, sweat shining on his face. "What do we do now?" Claire looked down at her notebook, its pages nearly spent, the last line still glowing faintly. "None will stay. None will hollow. None will carry you." She closed it carefully. "We keep writing, faster than it can." They stood there, 3 kids in the glare of a streetlight, the summer heat pressing on them, the world suddenly bigger and stranger than before. Somewhere in the distance, faint and thin, an ice cream tune faltered on a wrong note. Claire whispered to herself, to the dark, to whatever might be listening. Halfway and shallow, home by 10. But she knew summer had only begun.